good?
Yep. If you want to go ahead and open it.
All right. Looks like one's about 3:06, and at this time we will call the work session of the Canyon City Commission to order. With that, Joe, I guess y'all are running with me.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
So, everybody should have quite a lengthy packet. Joel and I have been working on financial policies, and John's been assisting as well. So you will see each of those kind of listed out in the agenda packet right here. And if anybody needs to look at this, I've got it right here with me. So, let's start with the Public Finance Investment Act policy. I don't have it printed out, but I do have some of the spreadsheets that were in here printed out for everybody's purpose. So, I have the PFIA separated. I have one that has a track changes version and one that has a clean version. So you can see what changes were made from our previous policy. In conjunction with, is it Government Code? Government Code 2256? Okay. Chapter 2256 in the Texas Government Code. City of Canyon and all cities are required to have a Public Finance Investment Act. Basically make sure we're not investing our public monies in a very high, in a very volatile environment more than anything. And so the PFIA helps guide us in that document in regards to our policy and what we can and what we cannot invest those monies in.
Do you not have one now?
We do.
We have one now.
We do. Yeah, we're just
So
we're supposed to look at it. Sorry.
The red line's in here in the regular
Yes.
meeting. So
Yes, there should be in the. I think the clean version might be in the clean version is probably in the agenda packet under this item, but the red line's in the work session packet. But yes, we do. That's what we've amended. And let me see what page it's on. Should be item 5 and 6 in the cover sheets.
New policies first.
29. Okay. 29 is where it's at. So we cleaned it up a little bit in terms.
This is the same policy we have now.
Yes.
Except for where you redline it.
Yes, correct. Correct. That is right. That is correct. So we've had this in place. You go to 40, you can see the track changes. The biggest thing that we changed was in some of the authorized investments. We did most of these things were already permitted. We just did further clarifications on these. We talked more about obligations. Let's see, CDs, certificates of deposits, and obligations. Most of these were very just basic, rudimentary. We just highlighted it a little more in depth. We actually modeled the city of Plano's language in a lot of this section right here. Nothing really earth-shattering.
So are we looking at allowing, earlier we weren't allowing mortgage-backed securities. So are we looking at that now then, or is that,
Let's see. I think we left those out. Yeah, I don't think we included those, Gary.
and I think that's,
Yeah, I don't think we. That was one. I know one of the things that Joel and I really talked about when we were in the early discussions of these, because that was one that Plano allowed. We didn't think that would be applicable to Canyon.
Yeah, actually, those are specifically listed under the investments non-allowed.
okay.
Once you go down to page 48.
Yep.
48 of the PDF.
Yeah, actually, yeah, you're right.
Okay.
It's number 2 in there. We do not allow that one. The mortgage back. Most all the ones in here are government backed for the most part. Reviewing other city investment act policies, almost exact same. Very similar across the board, so very few differences. Most of that comes from the statutory language in there, so mostly all the same straight across. Not a lot of stuff to look at on the investment act, just trying to do some cleanup. We're supposed to look at it about every year, and so that's why I wanted to make sure we did that, because we didn't look at it last year. And right now, our only authorized broker is still Happy State Bank. And that's at the very end. I did remove some stuff at the very end that talks about fund balance. That section will be in the new comprehensive fund balance and reserve policy that we're about to look at. So that was the primary reason I removed it from the investment policy. It shouldn't be in the investment policy. It needs to be in its own policy. And that's predominantly where most of the work that Joel and I put in was in the new fund balance reserve policy. So that did get removed, and I put a note on there as such. Anybody have any discussion items for the investment act? I figured it would be a pretty smooth sailing one. It's very standard. I will say a lot of the stuff we're talking about, you know, there are some things we're looking at right now that do tie back to our bond rating drop. And so several of the things in here are related to some of the things we're trying to improve upon. A lot of the things we have in these policies, we are doing in practice. We are doing these in practice. Any other thoughts on investment? I feel good that we can go ahead and, if y'all want to take action tonight on the investment policy. I think we feel good with that because there was not a lot of substantive change. I will preface that if you do not want to take action on the comprehensive fund balance and reserve policy, and I won't recommend the fiscal policy and procedures at this time, we're just looking at a draft of it, that we would be okay with that. There is a lot of information to digest in that, and we don't want to pressure y'all in any way.
So does this say that all of our Happy State Bank is the only broker?
That's correct.
But not limited to that?
It is limited to that.
Limited to only Happy State Bank?
That's correct.
Is that a change, or is that the way it's always been?
It's been like that. They tied that into our contract because they handle our bank account, and they tie that into that contract.
How long is that contract?
I haven't looked at it yet, Paul.
It was paid out, Paul, so,
Mhm,
and then
yeah.
I think it has the ability to extend it a couple of times, so.
There's another year or two of years on that contract.
And we'll take a look at that once that time rolls around. So.
Sure, but it says that they're the only broker we can use.
Right. It was in that contract.
Yes.
That's correct. And so we will probably discuss that at length when that comes around. So.
Well, I guess my question would be, would we want to use another broker, or why would we want to use another broker?
Well, in my past experience, we've used several other facets of brokers in terms of investments. Previous, you know, a lot of times Amarillo National Bank has better interest rates on CDs. Sometimes text pools, which are a bunch of governments pooling together for bonds. Sometimes you can get a better rate there, but there's still an array of other investment areas you can choose from.
Okay, no.
So,
Good answer, yeah.
and Happy does not always have the best interest rates.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
But that would be the reason. I think previous life we had 4 or 5 brokers, you know, in there.
Yeah, I think we're happy, and obviously I'm very biased against it. But one thing we didn't look at the original bid last time was Happy has had a mutual fund type of a product that was tied to text pool, and so it actually was advantageous for us to be able to put a good part of the funds there. You know, those rates aren't what they used to be, but it really did make the city quite a bit of money there. as, you know, during a time period where interest rates were rising, it really made us money. I mean, okay, now it's in a different scenario, but during the time period, that was actually better for the city to have it there than if we had put it in some other CDs and all.
Or money markets, whatever we
Yeah,
choose.
and I can see where Andy would want it all, and I really don't blame him. I mean, I think that's.
It was advantageous to us at that point in time. I remember we went through those negotiations.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that either. I was just wondering what was going on.
That's very good. I didn't know that. Thank you, Gary. Any final thoughts on investment?
No, thank you, Joe.
Okay. So what's next? Fund balance policy. So part of the things we've talked about, and I've talked about this with a lot of you at length. So we have what is called a comprehensive fund balance policy.
Dr. Where, Joe? Joe, where do you say it started?
Well, it's, I believe, page 15, but I think comprehensive fund balance policy.
Actual presentation.
Yeah, it's just a resolution. The actual policy's in the agenda packet, I guess. I thought I included it in the work session. So the policy is in the agenda. I'll tell you what page that is. It is page. Come on. No, I got it. Page 106 in the agenda packet.
I think it's 108, Joe. That's 106 is the memo. Isn't it?
Yeah, 106 is the memo, so
Yeah.
I wrote quite a lengthy memo on this one.
Right.
108, this is a completely new policy. Some of the language that I just mentioned in the Investment Act that I took out did go into this policy though. So you've had a similar policy in here. I'm going to read a direct quote from our bond rating section that I've provided to everybody in front of y'all. Under adequate budgetary flexibility, the city maintains a formal fund balance policy, which was in the Investment Act, that requires a minimum unassigned fund balance or reserve in the general fund of 25% of budget expenditures. That's the general fund only. It does not include the utility fund. However, Canyon's Commission interpretation of the policy combines the available fund balance across all funds, including its enterprise or water sewer, in the overall budget. This practice reduces the clarity of legally available funds in its operating fund, which our criteria assesses to measure the degree a local government can look to additional financing flexibility in times of stress. I.e., there's clarity issues in fund balance reserve, or unassigned fund balance. So, and then it goes into talking about net operating deficiencies in the same sections. The drawdown in fund balance of the past 5 years is attributed to unplanned capital outlay within corresponding revenue sources, causing a structural gap. So, this policy should help iron that out, okay? So this is where I really need y'all to really jump in with this on me. I've got a proposal here. We can change it or look at it what we put. So let Joel and I help explain this as best as possible. So, and I'm getting in the weeds here on some of it. So there is a general gap, what we call general
accepted accounting principles.
Thank you. General accepted accountability principles. So put your accounting hat on. And so that aspect does with fund balance. An aspect of if we sold all our assets, water lines, sewer lines, everything, how much net position
Paid off
everything.
That's what would be left.
What would be left? So that's the accounting side of this. Now when we're talking fund balance for this policy purposes, we're talking typically cash on hand. okay? We call it budgetary fund balance. So there are two separate things. We do mention the gap aspect of this because it has to be tracked through government accountability standards, GASB 54. This changed back, was it 11 or 12? In 2011 and 12, they changed it from reserve, non-reserve, and all that to unassigned fund balance, restricted. They changed all that terminology, okay? And so that still has to be tracked because of general fund movement. But I want to say, when I mean unassigned fund balance, I'm talking for this purpose more cash. What cash on hand do we have? Not necessarily what we talked about for the accounting aspect.
And then across this, that's what we're interested in.
That's right.
Because under the gap, I mean, we're never gonna sell our assets or streets and all to come up with that.
Be interested to try to sell off your streets.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, Gary. And that's what this whole policy is aimed at, is having that appropriate reserve that we can look at moving forward. Okay? A lot of that goes into some of the accounting aspect to clarify that, but I go into all the unassigned fund balance and non-spendable fund balance. For example, there's assigned fund balance. Excuse me, committed fund balance. For example, when y'all took action to do the AMR project, y'all committed part of the fund balance, $500,000, to go to that project. So that is not in reserve or unassigned. You have committed it as the formal body. Okay? Unassigned fund balance, or what we are going to talk about in reserve or savings account, is funds that are not committed to any project. They're just cash on hand. So
Spendable cash.
spendable cash. Okay? So, let me go down. There's a lot of things to look at. So, we've prefaced a fund balance that we're going to propose to the commission. We're proposing 25% in the general fund and 25% in the utility fund of expenditures. So, if you look at this sheet, has everybody met Christian? Christian's our intern. He's been interning with us. He helped me do this sheet right here. So this will help you get a comparison. But there's also a snapshot at the very end of this policy. And so we're proposing the 25%, which is also 3 months. And so that's the very first one on general fund, right there, and utility fund. So you can see what those are. That's what we're proposing right now. So the maximum would be 35%, the one next to it. And we're doing it on percentage basis, not months. However, 25% is 3 months of operating. So this policy basically says we cannot spend any of that money. It has to stay right there. Those dollars will be invested and already are invested at this time, per our Investment Policy Act that we just talked about. So we'll have 4.7 million and some change invested.
How does that compare to what we do today?
Not better. Because we're only technically supposed to have 25% of the general. So technically you're only supposed to have 2.7. That's it. In addition to this, we have also in our debt service, so we have debt service for the cap. That payment, and you can see this is our full debt schedule. If you want to know all the debt we have, it is right here. I want to say thanks to Joel for putting this together. This is our debt schedule. This is what we're paying in debt for year. Our cap payment is $384,300 in 2020. So we have to have, that is what is called a restricted fund balance. That has been restricted because the voters took action on it and restricted it to that. We can't go spend that money on a water line or a sewer line. It has to be on that project. We have almost 12 months in reserves to make a payment. We are at $317,000 in the debt service fund, which is great. So if that fund got cut off immediately, we could pay a whole year without having any issues. So we're almost there. Our policy here will say we have at least 50% or one payment. And we have that, which is only $192,000, but we're actually at $317,000. That would be in addition to the two numbers I just that I just mentioned to Cody, the general, the 25%. So that amount is in addition to those. We've excluded it from that one in this chart. Our actual cash, and then I'll go into the policy itself a little more. Our actual net position as of March 31st, we have, without the restricted that I just named, about $5.7 million. So we're easily able to meet this 25%. And then we would have $949,000 left over unassigned fund balance. Before we go ahead, Joel.
I might add that currently the way that policy reads, the way you kind of introduced that, is that we take all of the resources, the cash, from utility fund and general fund, but we're only meeting one criteria, and that is 25% of the budgeted expenses of the general fund by itself.
And is that one of the criticisms then of why they lowered the bond rating? Is that
Possibly.
That's what it said.
But remember, I don't know if you guys remember, Chris had told us it was because the reason we had dropped it because we weren't carrying enough debt.
Also, there's several criticisms in here.
Multiple criticisms.
And weak economy. I know Chris and I talked about that at length. Overall, in my own research I've done, a lot of cities dropped. It's not just us. But this goes into a lot of the details. So what we're doing here today is the way I look at it, like a house. We're trying to set a foundation, and you got to start that with our financial policies to build the house.
And I may be getting ahead of you, but I remember, and maybe it was the way it was interpreted to us, that we were not using our reserves correctly.
Right.
Yes, that's correct.
And so you're asking us to increase the amount of reserves we have.
Actually,
Define it.
reduce and define it. And what he's gonna get to beyond
Okay,
this
I
is
probably got too far ahead.
Capital
a
improvement
more
plan is what they want us
focused,
to do.
yeah,
That's what he's gonna talk about.
a more focused reason on why we're putting these reserves in place and why we're holding them.
So, and I may be getting ahead of you, but so they didn't like the fact that we went over the policy and had too much in reserves.
Yep.
And so y'all's answer for that is for us to increase our policy where we have required to have more in reserves.
I wouldn't say the answer to that. It's more to define it. You know, and I'm putting the 25% utility fund just as a proposal. This is very much open for discussion once I get through the highlights here. I want to hear from you guys if you even want that or not.
And a concern of theirs, Cody, was that we were spending money out of our reserve as opposed to having a budgeted item, part of our budget. We say we're going to put this money aside, just like you did for AMR. We didn't do that for other things.
But this is the statement that what their summary says is management has confirmed that there is no plans to reduce its current reserve levels.
Yeah, we're pretty much at the same reserves. But your reserve level was only tied to the general fund, which is only 2.7 million. We've got 5.7 in unassigned or reserve, technically could be.
But then we went and did a project and they saw that as lowering our reserve.
Right. You did a project that was unplanned for. They've been doing that over the years. You've been doing a lot of unplanned projects, and that's where they criticize you.
And we may have planned for them in here,
Us.
but it didn't get into the budget. It wasn't listed. They couldn't tell that we had planned to do that project. They thought that what we were doing were like emergency crisis type
Reactionary.
situations. And so they didn't trust us at that point in time. What else are you gonna keep doing? And so they wanna see in the budget, which is where the capital improvement plan comes into play, where they can see us planning.
Right. You know, with this policy, we would keep these dollars in reserve and invested and with our investment policy, and wouldn't touch those.
But then the amount, if you had a surplus year,
Right, you're gonna
that
have-
wouldn't stay in reserves.
Right. Let me-
Under your policy, it's
yep.
gonna get kicked over into the capital improvements.
Correct, let me go
It's
into
gonna go
that,
somewhere.
let me go into that, that's about what I was gonna go into.
Well, if you got the reserve and we have to need to use it, can we tap it?
That's right. There was definition of what it can be used for in here, Paul, so.
Sorry, I should've just kept my mouth shut.
It's okay, I'm getting there,
Yeah,
y'all.
what's the restriction?
You're thinking. So, excess of reserve, so if we go, so it says ideal, no more than 35%, but no less than 25%. However, if we go over 25% and wanna use some, we have the authority to do this. And when I mean we, I mean Joel and I, and also us, when we start doing the CIP, us as the commission. So if we have excess reserves, here are the items we have listed of what they could go to. And so we would determine this kind of at the end of a fiscal year. So say hypothetically we have $1 million in revenue left over, we're meeting our minimum requirements of 25%. We could put those in long-term accrued liabilities or retirements and things of that nature. All of that's self-sufficient right now. There is no issue with the pensions or any of that, or post-employment benefits. You might see that because Dallas had that same issue happen. We could take it to appropriate to lower the amount of bonds or debt service payments, which here's all our debt payments, so these are the debts we're actively paying. We can go and increase it into the capital improvement plan. We could put it in the capital equipment fund, which we're paying for vehicles, so we have an internal service fund. We're doing our own leasing program in-house. We buy a police car, it gets a 5-year lease internally. They pay that lease for that car in their budget every year. So they have a line item in their operating budget to pay for that police car, or how many police cars they have in there per year. We can do a one-time expenditure to help reduce future operating costs. Fifth Avenue has a line that's having us touch 5 to 6 times a year. It needs to be replaced. That could be a one-time fix, replace that line. It lowers our operating expenses because we're not having to go out there and put clamps on it.
So like this, where that CIP, the 949,000, if we just had something like that came up, that could be used for that then.
Yeah,
So-
I put it in there for now, and we can discuss that 949. And then last, we could do a startup expenditure for a new program or an approved program by the city council or commission that may take over multiple years. So if we had a project that come up that we really wanted to do, that would allow us to do that. So those are the 6 areas we could do that we have right now. And I think also we have in here, we could go to increasing our reserve as well. If we wanted to start moving towards the 35%, say we slowly start doing that, we can start doing that as well. Start increasing that reserve some more. So those are the designations now to what Paul indicated. Let's see, where's that? So funding the reserves will typically come from the unassigned fund balance, which right now we have about 5.7. Most of that's invested right now, and that's where most of these revenues will come for over time.
So, looking over 2 pages down from where you were, the designated circumstances.
Oh yeah,
That's
for
where-
the reserve payments.
That's where it identifies the things that we could spend that emergency reserve for. Natural disaster response. If we had an opportunity for a grant that required a match, we might use it for that. If we had a shortfall on the
What
budget
page is it?
revenue.
112, Gary. It's right at the bottom. I have it at the very bottom on 112. It says designated circumstances. I will number these pages. I'm sorry, y'all, if I have to put numbers.
Shortfall in budgeted revenue, if there was some kind of crisis that caused that. Unforeseeable expenditures in excess of 20% of the budget, we got into major repair or some incident like that. And then when unforeseen circumstances or emergencies and another fund require the general fund to compensate.
So this lets you get into your 25% reserve.
These would be.
So does natural disasters, would that include the time we're in right now, the pandemic?
Yes, it would. Pandemic is a natural disaster.
Okay, so let me go back.
Yep.
So GASB requires us 25% of our general fund.
That is their recommendation.
But the standard is 25% operating expenses, which ends up being a quarter of the year, essentially.
Yeah, 3 months.
So you're adding to utility fund money to that.
I'm adding the same 33 months to utility fund, correct?
So is it really 50%?
What do you mean?
I mean,
It's
is it-
25% of general.
It's twice what we're doing right now.
Yes. But you're already doing twice now.
Yeah, but it's not accounted for. It's not defined where that money's going.
That's right. But I mean, it is, but you've got a lot of unassigned fund balance that we've just invested. So I think we had like 4.
Right now, we're at 52% of the general fund.
Yeah.
Expenditures.
So why are you wanting to change our policy from 25 to 50, basically?
Well, we're not. We're designating 25 for general and 25 for utility.
Right, but right now we're just 25 for, so in the end result, total money, we're up to 50% reserve.
In general only. If you did just general fund, that would be 50%. If you took all the money we had and put it in general fund, we would be at 52% of the
Right,
general. Yeah.
so we're doubling what our reserves are. We're making a policy to double our reserves, but what is required. I think that's what Cody's asking, I think that's what I'm hearing.
So we're still at the same. We're just redefining.
In total, it'll be about
It'll be
the same.
about the same.
No, I'm talking about the policy in place now.
But the policy.
I'm just
you may-
proposing this.
You may be saying that right now, the money that we have in the bank, cash on hand, is the same, but that our policy is not the same.
Correct.
Our policy right now is that we keep 25%.
25 to 50.
And we're
25.
fixing to make it 50.
It's right now.
25 twice.
Right. Right now, it's in our current policy, it's 25% minimum in the general fund. Optimal is 50%.
Right.
Does not mention the utility fund whatsoever.
We're bringing the utility fund into calculation.
Mhm. That's right.
To what we're gonna measure for.
Yeah.
So, just a proposal. I'm fine with making it all in the general fund if y'all want to.
I just wonder, I mean, I'm not gonna disagree with you, I just wonder, just having it assigned isn't important enough, I don't think. I mean, I understand defining it and assigning the money, and I like that, I like that y'all are doing that. But, I mean, that's still extra money that's coming in, that, I mean, am I missing that, Gary?
You know, one thing that I think we could maybe look at doing is, when are we gonna need the money? And it's a time like now, what if we're in a shape like Amarillo or something happened and, we don't want to make some of the cuts they're gonna make this year, and so we're pulling money out of reserves. But I think our income's more likely to get hit on the general side. I think it could get hit some on, if times were tough and we were in a recession or a depression, we're not gonna sell as much water for watering yards.
Mhm.
So I think there is some there, if there were any tweaking that I think you could maybe kick around is, okay, what about 25% in the general fund and 15% in the water sewer, and I'm just throwing that out. But,
And that's what I want y'all to throw out. I want y'all to actually discuss that aspect. It's just what
One
I'm
thing I
suggesting.
really like about this is I think it does define it to where there's something in the middle there, because once we get into that, and we'll talk about it here in a minute, but once you get into that 25%, or if we took the other down to 15, once you get to that level, then you've got 12 months to cut salaries, to cut positions, you really, think you kinda wanna say that for depression. I mean, it's there, or maybe not depression, but some really
More
bad to get
catastrophic.
into.
Right.
So, I like the 10% middle ground where you got some breathing room in there, and so for say for this year, if we need to pull $1 million out, and if we have to, we don't necessarily have to go in and say, okay, we've gotta start, you know, cutting salaries, we've gotta start cutting expenses, and you know, there's 6 or 8 things that you have to do. So I like the way the policies, that there is some middle ground in there, that you don't just ride. If a year like this year, if we decide we want to pull 500,000 out, well, you know, we could do that without having to make some of those hard choices, you know. So I like that. Whatever numbers we come up with,
Sure.
I like that middle ground.
And that's what I want to talk with you guys. I want to put y'all on the spot. You know, if we want to do just general fund, Cody, I'm okay with that. If we wanted to not have a percentage in utility fund, I'm perfectly.
Does it just make you feel less safe not having that money in the bank?
I don't
You
think
just
so.
felt like it included the whole picture a little more. Cause you're using your operating expenses of the utility fund also as a consideration. Cause if we had a major crisis, it would affect everything that happens in the utility fund, just like it would everything that happens in.
So you feel like we haven't really been at 25%?
We've been way above that
Way
earlier. I mean,
No, I'm
in
saying
not
our policy,
policy.
I'm saying our policy's really not a true 25%. And what would Gatsby say?
It's just been on the general fund.
Yeah, it's just been, everything's been moved over to the general fund. You've
Really,
been well
I think
above
what you have to keep in mind is that the utility fund is really like an enterprise fund. It's like a
Right.
separate business. And so it's really kind of looked at as being self-sustaining.
So the problem I have, the additional problem I have, and this is why it's stuck in my head, is because this locks us into keeping the same system we have as opposed to trying to equalize those systems where you know, we're not always having to take money out of utility fund to pay general fund.
That will always occur.
That's always gonna be there, though.
I get that it's always gonna be there, but it's way too high, and we've agreed on that. We agreed on that this time last year, that we're gonna start working towards that. If what we're saying on this, then that we just give that up. We're just saying.
What do you mean it's been too high, the transfer?
Mm-hmm.
I would disagree.
Well, us as a body gave instructions to the staff to change that, to start working towards that.
To work towards.
Less of a transfer?
Mm-hmm.
What in your minds is less of a transfer?
Well, I mean, we, just in an idealistic way, that the tax on the citizen from the utility fund is too high and too low on the ad valorem side.
But, yeah, so you're countering your usual comments because the way to offset is to increase taxes.
Right, which, you know, I'm not necessarily opposed to if it's lowering the utility fund, if it's lowering the
transfer.
impact. Right.
And I mean, in realistic, you know, and no one's gonna like this, I don't like this, I live in town. In order to get close to that, you need to double your property tax.
I don't think we ever get there. I
I
think,
don't
you
either.
know, we can ease it up, but we didn't make that decision this last budget cycle. We basically didn't even keep the same property tax rate, so we went the other direction.
Property tax covers
versus-
about 25% of your general fund. So your general fund's about $11 million, it's covering about 25% or taxes.
And, you know, at a level, I kind of go the other direction too. I think that there's something to be said for, and even TCEQ likes a tiered system to, you know, to keep people from putting too much water out there, because we just don't have the water in the state of Texas. So I think there's something to be said. It is punitive for people who go in and use a high amount, but we can structure that to where it's not punitive for folks that use a low amount.
We've talked about it for a couple of years.
So I don't really see an issue, and we've not raised our water rates. I really don't see an issue with what we're doing, and I think we always will have some transfer there unless we double our property tax.
What does this say about us, about that?
It talks about
Couple of locations.
talks about the transfer, I'm trying to remember.
Under weak budgetary performance, a lot of the cities, second paragraph of weak
Yeah,
on
so
page 4.
The weak performance in the 2018 fiscal is attributed to negative variance, $500,000 total.
We're out budgeted. Well, at the last two sentences, while the city's water and sewer fund consistently produces positive operating margins leading to its healthy financial position, the general fund's reliance on transfers and recent practice of funding unbudgeted capital outlay indicates difficulties in raising sufficient government funds revenue to support operations absent of an increase in its property tax rate. And there's your breakdowns in general fund revenues.
So my question is it fair to the taxpayer to go from a 25% reserve to 50% reserve?
Well, that's where we're at now.
That's what I mean, but our policy is 25.
Right.
Is it fair to go to a 50% reserve to the taxpayer?
But it says between 25 and 50.
Yes, it says 25 minimum, and it says optimal 50.
Yes, that's what it says now, but for 25, that's 50
As the
minimum.
bottom, right.
That's fair to the taxpayer.
That's a question we gotta ask ourselves. Well, very good point.
I don't have an issue. I think you could justify lowering the water sewer from the 25 down. So I think it's not as likely to get hit as hard. I don't know, that may be wrong. You know, maybe discretionary income does drop.
Well, and I think as much as your transfer is, it covers that. If they were equal, it wouldn't. So the large amount of transfer says, just in my mind, maybe I'm just looking at it different, maybe I don't understand it. But the percentage of one fund going to the other, if they're gonna be equalized, those numbers can't be the same. Does that make sense? If the general fund's going this way every year, and water and sewer's going this way every year, then why would you not have them at different rates? Why do you just pick an arbitrary 25% on both? Does that make sense what I'm saying? Heck, I mean, why not do 30% on one? I would feel more comfortable. It doesn't matter, it's going all in the same pot, but.
Whatever you have left over, what we are hoping to put in capital improvements.
I like to see the dollar go to something as often as we can.
So whatever is excess out of the percentage, whatever y'all define and what we come to a terms with, will go into one of those things listed out earlier. And that's the intention here.
I have no problems with taxpayer money coming into the city, as long as it goes to something. And so I think that's what you're saying, and I kind of see it the same way you do. They see it as, well, we're already doing that. We're just gonna get a policy that defines that.
Right.
But it took us a long time to get to the 5.7. It didn't take us 1 year. So we agree that 5.7 wasn't excess out of 1 year.
Well, you did spend 3.1 million of that. It was higher. It was at 8 or 9.
Correct, we used to be 6 months or so.
Right.
Yeah, you know, and I guess I come from a time where, you know, whenever John and I first went on with Glenn Metcalf, you know, it was just a different mindset that, you know, we bank these reserves and you know, since then, we've seen now $3 million, you know, we pieced that out where as a percentage of the budget, it's way down now from what it was back, you know, 15 years ago. So
the question is,
that doesn't mean it's bad where we're at, but
No.
it's a whole lot less reserves encumbering from where we were 15 years ago.
the question is what management and commission is comfortable with. And I think that's what we want to iron out today. And I know everybody's got differing opinion
I
on
love you defining it, and I love having those six different options. That this money goes in these places, brick streets, but whatever. But if we're gonna have the money from the citizen, I say we, you know, spend it on them and use it, as opposed to have a higher reserve.
And that's fine. I'm good with that, Cody.
But
I would like to have some guidance from you guys of what would that mean, having zero reserve in utility and just having it all in general in the government fund, or having a small amount in utility and a certain amount in the government fund. I need a good hybrid or a good scenario from you.
I like the 25% in the general fund.
Okay.
But I don't like the 25 in somewhere a little bit.
Yeah, I think you can sure justify that. I don't know what that is. Is that
I don't think-
15% or 10%
Yeah.
or I don't know.
I think
but-
10 or 15 would be more than enough, because I don't think it's near the risk.
Very good point, I agree.
Which one's more stable? Which
No.
one's more stable income?
Water.
Water,
Yeah.
So why would you not use water and sewer at 25%?
We did it on a 3-month, that was where we went. It was a quarter.
Yeah. But that's my feelings on it, but whatever.
Thank you.
Because we've been maintaining that 25% reserve as long as I can remember, or more, a lot more, actually.
Yeah,
And I just,
earlier it's
moving,
way higher.
and the good thing here moving forward is, one, we're defining everything a lot more clear, and we're trying to take away the criticism in the bond rating to help next time around bond rating go up, but also those unassigned fund balance dollars are not just sitting there. Joel and I are gonna look at those at the end of the year, we're gonna send those to one of those things, more than likely it'll be the capital improvement plan, to start working on capital outlay, water lines, sewer lines, roads, and infrastructure.
No, I like that. Cody's right, that people, taxpayers, the money's sitting there, they wanna see something done. I think he's correct on that, instead of just hoarding all the money all the time. We got some excesses.
Mr. Ray, you've been awfully quiet.
Just taking it in. I kind of agree with you guys, though. I think 25 and 15 make more sense.
Okay. Agreeable with that. Please don't let me say I'm not disagreeing with any of this.
No.
I want
And
somewhere to
and I'm
start.
with that too, but I think there needs, let's go back to the AMR system. Hell, it took us almost a year to get that deal done. And it seemed like. So, I think we need to see, and maybe I'm looking at this all wrong, we need to see 10 or 15 or 20 projects earlier than just saying, okay, here they are.
There's your point. And we are working on that.
Okay.
So let's back up, and that's a great point. Let's talk about AMR. How would AMR fit into this system?
So here's the balls I've got moving right now. So right now, I've talked to our engineer about putting a CIP, capital improvement plan, together for 5 years. Like we have the operating budget that's coming, we would have a CIP budget and an operating budget each year. And so we would go through those projects and the maintenance and operating budget at the same time. That won't be ready until next budget year. It'll take that long time.
Sure.
We'll define each project. Right now, I'm talking to San Marcos probably tomorrow to talk about how they did their CIP. We're slowly working through that, and John's gonna help me on a lot of it too. And so that's how it will be.
Based on the decision we make here, will determine your first year, your CIP, you'll have money in the bank to go ahead and start assigning or delegating projects out.
We can. We already have some projects in the waiting, so one of the things.
Yeah, sorry, it's just a natural reaction.
One of the things that we've discovered, Joel, and so each year, if, let's say Dan Reese had a public works budget, and say he didn't spend $50,000 one year. So they would encumber that for future years. Well, Joel and I could not find a running log of that. So Dan thought he was encumbering for brick streets for the last 2 or 3 years. Well, it actually is in that unassigned fund balance of 5.7.
So back to general fund.
So we do have some capital projects already ready, and that should be funded.
So when you look at capital projects and you give us a list of 20, and we pick one that's, I'm just throwing this number out, $15 million.
Sure.
So do you throw the rest of the other 19 away until we raise enough money to provide the $15 million? Do you prioritize these things?
So to clarify, your project, one project would be $15 million.
Yeah, I'm just saying that. I mean, I'm just using that as a number.
Sure.
So we had 4, and then we're up to 8, and then 12, and then you go up, and then we just throw all the other ones aside so we can get to that major one. Is that how it works?
So a lot of projects will cover multiple years. So let's say you need to redo a street, $500,000. So say we do 100,000, 2020, 2021, 100,000, 2022, 100,000 until we get to that number, and then we do the project.
Okay.
But you're doing with multiple projects at the same time.
Joe, you're also telling me though
So
that.
50 million would have.
And I think the capital improvement plan that you had put together has different sources of funding. So some of them are by doing that, but some of them are out of debt. So.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
you
There
know,
will be
15
some-
million might be, okay, we're gonna do that in 3 years, but we're not setting aside.
So
any
we're not
money.
necessarily paying
We're-
cash for every.
We're just doing that out of
Every
debt.
That's
project
correct.
we do.
There will be
Okay.
recommended projects that we go out for tax supported debt.
Right, because you wouldn't wanna do that for a project where at the end of the debt, the worth of whatever it is you bought is zero versus a road
Right.
that would continue to pay off dividends later.
There are some things that are too much where you just can't save up for long enough going. There's no way. You know, you're gonna need, that's what we did with the cap. You know, you're gonna need some long-term debt.
And there'll be a scoring system, Roger, that we'll go through and we'll rank these and we'll score those and then we'll come forward to you all.
So these are the priorities.
These are the
Yeah.
priorities, and then that gives you the opportunity to shuffle the deck some, if that's what you choose to do, and then we go forward.
That's what we're looking at now. We're looking at other city models to see their priority rankings. You know, like, I know one thing in San Marcos was, if we did this project, would it alleviate ongoing operational costs? I.e. Fifth Avenue, we're going out 6 times a year to fix. So there are certain categories, and we're doing the research and homework on that right now.
What's the floor and ceiling on that number you're looking at?
In terms of the capital improvement plan? You will be looking at $30 to $40 million for projects.
But what's the lowest, like, give me an example what the lowest amount for a capital improvement project would be? 'Cause you're not gonna use that for a $100,000 project.
I mean,
Most, yeah,
median-
you can. Most, the limited is, it typically needs to be a fixed asset.
Right.
So it has to be a fixed asset, so no vehicles, unless it's maybe a ladder truck might go in there. $50,000.
That's what I'm saying.
Some cities do 25, but I'm thinking we're doing 50. That's kind of what we've talked about.
You know, I agree too. I think we're fine tuning the reserve a whole lot more than what, you know, used to, we didn't really look at. We didn't even know what we had in reserves, to be honest. I mean,
You know, we kinda had to.
we didn't have.
We had
a
to
good-
ask every year.
But we
my first
weren't
year.
even getting good numbers there. I mean, here, a year ago, we were told there was 8 million in the reserve. We didn't even know these
We weren't sure.
numbers. We weren't sure. So, but we were operating for a long time with a big number in reserve that, Glenn Metcalf, you know, plus or minus, built that up. But it did give us the luxury to be able to, okay, we got a really good bid on this, you know, development, you know, or the water sewer going up north. Our answer is, we just take $3 million out of reserves. Well, but that wasn't the only one. There were quite a few smaller projects.
Correct.
You know, Steve Street paving project or so, I think maybe over on 4th Avenue. We pulled out of reserves a lot that wasn't planned, so we were slinging from the hip a lot more.
Right.
And this gives us more, between this and the CIP program, it gives us more methodology to it versus just.
So this may be an unfair question. Can y'all tell us about ballpark what we've been adding to reserve every year?
Oh, it's
How many
fluctuating.
years ago did we put the 1.5 in, Joel?
Well, I know it's been going down the last year.
Yeah.
2 or 3.
We did.
Whenever that North Canyon sewer system, the water system, all that started, that's when it started going down.
So it's about 3.5 years ago.
Probably 3 years ago.
Yeah.
There was a high 1.5.
But typically, it's less than $1 million, more than 500,000.
Yeah, but,
I'd have to look back.
but Cody, you gotta offset that. On the other side of the deal is that more of the income are coming in on tax base of all the homes being built. And if you do a project like that, you gotta look at your revenue that's gonna be changing. Every year it changes, more homes that goes up.
I'm gonna look at
So
this.
it's kind of investment.
Third grade wise for me, 'cause
You
that's
gotta
how
look
it
at
is.
return.
So, the project, how much did the utility, the water, sewer, whatever, how long did it take to pay back that money?
Right, you gotta look at your return on your investment.
Yes,
Look at
that's,
things like that.
So-
that's what I'm curious to know.
Well, that's a hard one unless you really get into the meat of it. We're slowly looking at kind of what Paul said. We're looking at the fiscal aspect of new subdivisions and what it pays. You know, we're looking at. We've looked at the Crestview subdivision quite a bit in that extent, mostly to educate ourselves. You know, because there's several things we're looking at, especially with utilities. Do we bring enough utilities to just flourish that subdivision, or do we do enough to be ready for the next subdivision? You know, there's a lot of aspects of that, and when we really get into it, I mean, it's gonna be a lot more expensive than you think, but going to what kind of Paul says, you're expanding for the next growth. Is there a return on investment? Right now, we're still looking at that. I know Joe Shane, his engineer, we're looking at his estimates and comparing some of the estimates of this outfit that we're using, and we're asking them to tweak some stuff because we didn't agree with the consultant we're using. They were talking on replacement stuff, so they're gonna have to fix some of the numbers they proposed, because they were looking at replacing a street within 20 years. We don't do that. We can easily get 50 years out of a road if we take care of it right. So we thought that was inaccurate, and we wanted them to fix that. However, we wanted them to take in the maintenance costs that we're doing, you know, per year on that. So we're still working on that. We're still trying to educate, so I don't have an exact answer on that. But we're trying to get better to figure that out.
And the majority of that revenue, Joel, would have been from the utility side. Any revenue would be from the utility side.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not from the general fund. It's not from taxes.
Not typically.
Well, the taxes bring in revenue, but the bigger revenue will be the utility tax.
Right.
I agree.
So 3 months of 15 and 25% is gonna be almost 4 million instead of 4.7, or is that
And we're, yeah.
ballpark?
So we're at 5.7 now.
So Gary, how's that make you feel inside when you go from $8 million a year ago to?
No, you're exactly right. I mean,
$4 million.
that's the piece that, you know, how tight do we run it, and do we really get comfortable with it? But, you know, I think if there's a methodology to it,
Man, you could
then I
do a
get more
lot.
comfortable
We
with
could
it.
do a
So,
lot with that money, though.
and I get it. I get it, yeah.
We're handing back to the staff $1.7 million.
Right.
Right, essentially, depending on, do you have an estimate what our reserves will be this year?
No, not yet.
It's hard to, it's hard to let that front band start.
We're waiting, you know what, we're waiting to see June's sales tax to see how much we drop. Our recent sales tax was not bad, and so, for May, so we'll see how that drops.
But, you know, I do come from a mindset back early years that, you know, the bigger the reserve, the better. It's a more, you know, fiscally responsible you are and financially sound the entity is. And, you know, this is a little bit more is tweaking to me to tweak it. This is, you know, we've got a methodology here. In a way, it's sort of like there's also a reserve for a bank. You've got a methodology, you're reserving so much for different kinds of loans, because you're gonna have more losses in this kind of loan than that one.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I get it. If we're pretty comfortable with the methodology and comfortable with that amount, then, you know, worst case, you know, we can live with that. You know, I think we don't have near the liability, you know, our sales tax is probably the biggest liability for us, you know, compared to the city of Amarillo, where their sales tax is 3 times as much as their property tax. You know, our property tax is probably the most year in, year out, you know, solid, you know, we're gonna collect most of that year in, year out. And I would say then, probably water, fund is the one we have maybe the next most liability on, you know, just, there is some discretionary income that goes into that and all too. And then, yeah, sales tax is probably, you know, we've probably got the most liability on that piece and all, I guess.
It's been good, you know, we're still looking good right now on sales tax, that we may still do better than 2016. If it were to continue, we still may do better in 2016. So that hopefully will tell you that we're not as bad as a lot of people that Gary is talking about. There are several that are really hurting. So I feel good about where we're gonna be, so. And that's only 3 or 4 years ago. It's only setting us back a few years.
You know,
That's a win.
Just because we come up with these numbers, somebody probably ought to look at these numbers again in a couple of
that's what I was
years
gonna
and
say.
say, okay, is that
Supposed to be
model
done.
really, you know?
We would
or is that
review,
on
we would
target?
review this policy annually with the Investment Act. And so we really need to. And you know, they really need to look at it from your economic system. Canyon, Texas has a lot different economic system than Amarillo, Texas. You're not the same. Like Gary said, they have a lot of volatility in their sales tax. So if I was in that situation, I would probably have an increased reserve. More reserve because I have a massive volatility there. So that's what the book says on most of this. Take it from your economic situation. We're not them. We need to do what, like Paul was saying, some of that. We need to do what's best for Canyon citizens in our economic conditions. So, fully agree.
We put this into place, it's gonna help our rating.
It should, yeah. It really.
Because you continue to show that you have a roadmap and you have a plan for what you're going to do. And that's, as a bank and as an accountant and as a banker, that's what you want to see, is you've got a plan.
We've got a plan.
They felt like they couldn't see our plan because we didn't do it the way they wanted to.
And I know a lot of us have talked about really wanting to get a capital improvement plan and projects in place to do. And so we're really working hard to do that. We really want to. I'm excited.
And with that too, I think two things that I think maybe cost us were any transfer that we do from the water sewer to the general fund needs to be in the budget at the first year. We need to have plenty in there to cover that. And then just arbitrarily pulling out something for a $400,000 expenditure out of the reserves. Yeah, that needs to go through a capital improvements plan instead.
Unless it's an
Those two things
emergency.
would help us. Yeah.
That would be the only thing, is if it's an emergency typically. But.
Well, and just, I mean, it tightens their reins too. I mean, it gives them a lot of freedom in one way, but it also, you know, that freedom comes with some boundaries that you can't really go outside these boundaries. You can't come to us and say, you couldn't come to us and do AMR again. We couldn't do it.
The same way.
There's not a way
We'd have
for
to
you to do it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Is that?
Yeah, no, it
is that
does.
what
So
you're
that's
saying?
the downside, but
If it
you know.
was an emergency, yes, but just a random project, correct. And I think previously, that was one of the concerns. The reason there wasn't a capital improvement plan was that there wasn't a plan to fund that. And so there was a frustration in creating a list if it was just a pie-in-the-sky list. Joe's coming forward, Joe and Joel are coming forward with a plan which is actually showing you, through the capital improvement plan, how we can pay for those things.
Yeah. We're gonna do all the work to put the plan and capital improvements forward, but I'm gonna need assistance to help fund some of those projects. Otherwise, that plan will just sit on the shelf. And then our infrastructure will age and we won't keep up with the times.
Well, one thing about now, you know, whether it's something like a new police station or so, rates are way down. Now would be a good time to look at some of those long-term projects like that too.
We have some infill development happening in 15th, I think, over by the the Taylor's, the one by the hotels. What's that gas station right there by the hotels? Exact. That awkward triangle that's been right there to south, you know what I'm talking about? That's finally getting developed. We had a cost estimate to tie our utilities in for that developer at $60,000. Came back at $35,000. So the timing is right. Utility contractors are hungry. So that's a heck of a deal.
Well, you need to prove my development so I can get going.
I'm working on it. Believe me, you can ask John, we've put a lot of discussion into that development. You need to grade all my papers.
I don't want to grade your papers.
So, am I comfortable enough to say that y'all would feel good with 25% in general fund and 15% utility fund? In addition to having 6 months into the debt service, you can't really touch that anyway, so it's restricted.
So then you'd go to a max of 35 and 25 then, so is what you do to.
It'd be 15%, yeah, 15 in the utility and then 25 in the general fund. The utility fund has an $8 million expenditure.
I know what you're saying. His top end will be 50%, his top end will be 35%.
Yes. Yeah, in terms of maximum.
I'm okay with it.
Good.
I'm okay with it, you're okay with it. I don't see, like, you can talk numbers to me all day, but I don't see the projects that you have in mind, and so I'm okay with it. I don't want you to tie your own hands, you know, to where you're, I mean, I want your hands to be loose enough to where y'all can work on some projects. I love, if we've got the money, spend the money. If we don't have, I mean, if we're, the less reserve for me is better, once we get to a certain point. So I wanna make sure that y'all feel like.
You know, we're kinda throwing out 15%. I'd almost kinda like to hear from Joel too, you know, what he sees as liability in those two different funds
I'm
as
gonna
far as.
be more toward your end of the scale, being more conservative and wanting a bigger safety net. I was real comfortable with 25. But I see your point. If we feel like we're reserving enough to be ready for an emergency, it is pointless to have on that kind of. But I'm just conservative by nature, so that would be my reason for having a little higher.
And my devil's advocate to that is it's not completely restricted to where we have to take that money out and go spend it. So that's a decision you guys get to make, right? And you bring that to us and say, we understand you made this policy at 25-15, but we know we have the latitude to go ahead and spend all that, but we're not gonna do that. We're gonna keep this here and see what happens. I mean.
Oh, and this is, like you said, we revisit it every year. So
If we wanted to change it next year, Cody or Gary or any of y'all, we can do that.
Yeah.
But
If you come back next year and Joel's like, all year long, I was really nervous, this was a bad year, this is not safe for our community, let's switch that. I think that you could probably make an argument for that.
But yeah, I think a difference the way we're looking at this policy compared to past was the 25-50, but almost the more the better. You know, that was just kind of our minimum, and conservative, just the more the better. But this will take it to where then it'll be the 25 and 35 and 15 and 25, and once it hits those caps, it doesn't give us much discretion. It's really telling them they need to move it over and spend it.
Yeah, we have to.
Versus the way it used to be.
So between those two gaps, we can still move it over, and we will.
Right.
So we won't wait to get to 35.
It's hard for me to feel comfortable with, and I get having money in the bank. It's hard for me to feel comfortable with, and this is just one project, you know, that really impacts a lot of people, is that we have a policy at 25%, but we keep piling all this money in there. We continue to steadily raise income, or you know, ad valorem tax. Yeah, we have extra money in here, and we have brick streets that are a mess, or we have, you know, concrete sidewalks that are around the square that are just jacked up, and we're just, no, but you don't understand, people, this makes us feel better. Well, I mean, even if, and I may shoot myself in the foot by saying this, but even during these times, and we're not gonna dip into that?
No, you're bringing up the point that's where you gotta represent your taxpayer. What is good for the taxpayer? And that's why I think 25 is too high for the taxpayer, 15 is fine, I think 10 would be fine. But you need some reserve, but I think that 25 is too high. I don't think that's fair to the taxpayer.
On the utility side.
Yeah.
I'm agreeable to that. I know Joel is very conservative, but I'm more than agreeable with the 25 and 15. I think that's great. It just gives us some more funds to do some capital improvements, and do some things that we've been wanting to do and start that. We will bring y'all some capital projects this year.
Joel needs to be conservative, that's his job.
That's true. That's very true. That's right. So we will definitely bring capital improvement projects this year without having our plan in place, so you know where those monies are going.
Very cool. I dig it. I love all that y'all dig into. It makes it easier on the elected body to really understand that more.
And if you want to change it, Cody, we'll visit it again next year this time. So if we need to change it then we're good, you know.
Well, I think that's a good thing, it's flexible. We're gonna get a year to look at it, see what's going on.
Rightfully so.
Well,
So the other,
Yeah, buddy.
the other aspect is the fiscal procedures and policies. I'm gonna hold that one to the end. I'll get you on that one. We're not ready to take this one. Joel's been working really hard on this. This is kind of a thing we've been doing in practice. Let me pull it up. It kind of describes Canaan in terms of accounting and financing and all those aspects combined. this goes into a lot of principal items. Revenue management, capital outlay improvements, operating budget. Some of this takes a lot of the things in the code of ordinances, general accounting standards, as well as just good business, and puts it all into one resource.
Joe, what page?
I am on page 9 right now currently. It's in the work session document. Talks about internal auditing, internal controls. We're not quite done with this one yet, but most of this will not change. So 85% of it probably will not change. But it's more for that financial openness. I was going to say clarity, but that's not right.
And foundation.
And a foundation. And it spans, like it says in the purpose, accounting, auditing, financial reporting, internal controls, operating capital budget. You know, one of the things that Joel and I said we have committed to, we're going to bring finances to you every month. At least one meeting a month, you will get finances. It's on the agenda tonight, and so we're going to bring that. You know, one of the things that Joel has done a great job committing to is to have that balance. Y'all want to know what we have on cash on hand? He will have that every time he brings it. You will have a clear picture of that. Well, that's in here. So talking about bringing financials to it. Talks about how long it takes for us to go and get an audit. Things like that. Goes to auditing, internal controls. Talks about if somebody spent something on something, and Joel decided to do some random internal controls and pick somebody out. Say, hey, Joe went out and he had this meal. What was that for? To make sure it's applicable and applicable to the policy at hand. That I'm not just frivolously spending money, or John, or anybody. So, internal controls goes into here. Operating budget, capital outlay, the adoption process for the budget, what infrastructure is, machinery, equipment. What are alternative resources for revenues? So when you get some time, take a little. It's kind of Canaan's philosophy on the finances, but also having the stern foundation of how we need to do it. You know, we're typically is a pay-as-you-go city. Nothing against that. A lot of cities, Lubbock is not a pay-as-you-go city. Lubbock is a debt-oriented city. That's why they have $1 billion in debt. They're not as much as a pay-as-you-go. Canaan just been that way. There's a lot of cities like that in the Panhandle. And so some of that philosophy goes into some of this. That's the way we do it. You know, in this it talks about debt being the last solution. If we've exhausted grants, other special revenue streams, assessments, you know, debt would be the last solution. It goes into some of those aspects in here.
This is kind of taking a step backwards. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. If I would like for us to still target our reserve having that closer to the 35 and 25 range to go into a year like this. And you know, part of just sitting thinking, you know, I've got a friend that wants to play baseball or softball down there in Kenyon because Amarillo's not going to close or open their fields. Or that's what they're talking about but it's because of expense. You know, watched the video this morning, and they're talking about they're not going to open their pools. There's health concern, but the bigger concern is, you know, money. And so I think if we had future commissions where they were sitting right at the 25% and their options were some other cost cutting, I think they might say we need to shut down the pools and parks. And I like having a little bit of leeway in there. I like the way y'all have this set up. I just like to be in that middle ground or even closer to that 25-35 than the other end. Just where we don't get to where we've got to shut down the pool this year because we can't open expense wise. If we were like Amarillo, then we'd be saying, you know, some of those things. Well, we're just not going to provide some sort of, you know, that's an option, but I don't think that's a very good option at all too. So anyway, I don't want to just ride it the biggest part of the time at that 25%. You know, some buffer in there, and I think that's the way y'all have it set up here too.
Right.
But,
yeah. We have to be at that 25-50, no matter what. And then we have some leeway in the.
But have some cushion where
We
we
have
feel
to-
like we can keep the parks open, I guess is my.
Joel and I will take that recommendation. And so
Unless y'all
we'll
think otherwise.
rework this policy to, I think everybody's agreement with 25 and 15 as the minimums. And I get pretty.
But the great thing y'all have drawn up, there is a cap where it's not gonna go above that and, or it starts going towards capital improvement stuff.
And we'll provide, Joel and I will sit down, we'll edit that, so we'll just wait to not take action on that tonight. We'll edit it, and then we'll put, there's a snapshot at the very end of the policy. I don't know if y'all saw that, that's the biggest thing to look at. It shows the minimum, and then the maximum, and then shows actual.
And I think they're doing that, they're gonna do that anyway. You can already hear that they feel more comfortable with that, or they wouldn't have brought us the.
But I love it, I actually love it the way they've got it defined. So, yeah, I think it's really good to have that middle ground where it doesn't kick the triggers in day one, you start having to dip into it. So.
But I think we've done on the flip side of that, I think we've done a really good job of making sure that our, that cost benefit analysis, when we, put players on a field, how much does that cost us? We charge them the right amount maybe, or the cap, so much, research went into those numbers that we end up at a really good place. We're not in a bind necessarily when something like this happens, where we don't have to really worry about the money side of that as concerned. And we're also a smaller ship to turn, as opposed to Amarillo has.
Somewhat, but we always lose money on parks.
For sure.
I mean, it's a cost center.
For sure.
And the cap this year will lose more money because we can't keep our numbers up.
Yeah.
So we will, last year's about a break even.
Which is easier to do with one pool that has a lot of attractions.
True.
Versus 6 pools.
That's very true.
That's very little attractions.
We'll bring.
I think what I'm saying, I'm just bragging on our staff. I think they do a really good job of researching that stuff out and not put us in that type of bind.
We try to. I think we'll be good. We're still working on the cap and all that. So if I was uncomfortable, I would make sure to verbally say that. Now I'm not sure we're going to be able to give raises this year, and we're still researching that. A lot of cities are not doing it, so might be a sacrifice we have to make, But nobody's lost their job, and that's the best thing yet. And I'm thankful for that every day. We've got like 5 minutes till we go into full meeting. Anybody have anything else? So we'll talk more next time about the fiscal policies and procedures and give you all a little more time on that.
Sure.
And we'll re-edit it, and then we'll edit the comprehensive fund balance policy to bring back to y'all for approval. But I do feel good about the Investment Act going ahead and taking action on that.
That'd be the one thing we have.
Yep. If anybody does have any questions in the meantime, I'd love to visit about these.
I appreciate the focus on the bond ratings here.
Absolutely.
We can sit here.
It all ties together. CIP, bond rating, we just gotta keep that in mind.
And maybe as much as anything, I appreciate feeling like we have a good number on the reserve, and actually that is a good number.
It was solid. This man right here has worked really hard to try and do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me to text him.
Go off and on.
Boots here, so we'll meet.
Yeah.
We'll meet and then, you good for, text? Discussion?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Joel? Feel good? Okay. I knew they'd all have opinions. Yeah. It's
That's good discussion.
Yeah, 'cause